North of that, stretching up towards Cape Canaveral, about 3 to 6 feet. Tampa down towards Sarasota, 3 to 5 feet. And then again, Naples down towards Key West. This is where we're going to have the highest amount of storm surge, expected around 8 to 12 feet. Keep in mind, a single-story building is on average 10 feet tall. So you're talking the entire first story of a ranch home, for example, underwater. Very similar to what we saw in Houston during Harvey. Here's a look at those watches and warnings that we talked about. They have now extended further north, places like Daytona Beach, Orlando, and Tampa under a hurricane watch. Sarasota, Siesta Key, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami under a hurricane warning. But these are going to shift north as we get closer to that landfall. We talk about some specific cities. Take Miami, for example. In order for them to start feeling those tropical storm force winds, that could arrive as early as 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Hurricane force winds could arrive as early as 6 a.m. on Sunday morning. Total rainfall about 6 to 8 inches possible over the coming days. Naples could be looking at tropical storm force winds to arrive around midnight tonight.
Allison Chinchara, stand by. We're going to get back.
Oh, the latest path actually takes it pretty much, we're thinking, right over Cuba. In fact, the next advisory to come out in just less than an hour from now, they may actually call the landfall over Cuba. This takes it a little bit further west than some of the original models were trending, so this may have impacts on where the track of the storm goes from here. But right now, again, it's just to the north of Cuba. To be one of the big factors with this storm. From West Palm Beach stretching all the way down towards Key West, storm surge is expected to be about 5 to 10 feet. On the southwest side, Naples down to Key West, we're talking 8 to 12 feet. Then just a little bit north of that, around the Fort Myers area, 5 to 8 feet. But even places far north as Tampa could be experiencing 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. And rainfall, while it will be nowhere near what we had in Harvey, it's still going to be plenty high enough to trigger some flash flooding. Widespread, you're talking 4 to 6 inches of rain, but there will be several pockets that could pick up in excess of 10 inches of rain with this storm. And winds, let's face it, as a Category 5 storm, even a high-end Category 4, you're talking incredibly high sustained winds as well as wind gusts. And because the storm is so huge, you've got hurricane force winds that will extend on both sides of the coast. So, Don, it really doesn't matter whether you're on the East Coast side or the West Coast side, you're likely going to get hurricane force winds for several hours as it treks north.
All right, we'll continue to follow Allison Chinchara.
It is now back to a Category 5 storm. Winds have increased to 160 miles per hour. We anticipated it would get back up to a Category 5, but it has strengthened quickly. We're looking at wind gusts now 195 miles per hour. It is skirting so close to Cuba. In fact, it may end up being over land. We may actually have an official landfall over Cuba, if not right now, certainly within the next hour. But the storm, the majority of it is still over open water, and that's what has allowed it over the last couple of hours to intensify. So here's the thing. We expect it to be a Category 5 as it crosses over the Florida Keys, and then for the main peninsula of Florida, likely weaken slightly down to a Category 4. But again, I want to emphasize, we're talking the difference of maybe perhaps 5 miles per hour. So don't necessarily focus on whether it's a Category 4 or a 5 over the peninsula. Focus on the winds itself, because they are going to remain strong, even if you're talking a high-end Category 4 versus a low-end Category 5. We've also now seen the expansion of hurricane watches and warnings. They are now starting to push a little bit further north. We expected them to do this, and we expect them to continue to push further north as we get closer to landfall itself. The timing of landfall, especially, say, around the Key West region, likely between 4 and 7 a.m. on Sunday morning. Now, long before then, you're going to start to see some of those outer bands begin to push some very heavy showers and even some thunderstorms into portions of southern Florida, and you'll start to see some of that storm surge begin to build. At its peak, storm surge from West Palm Beach down to Key West is expected to be 5 to 10 feet. We're talking 8 to 12 feet from Naples stretching down towards Key West. Even as far north, say, as Tampa, Don, we're talking 3 to 5 feet. So again, we knew the storm would intensify a little bit more. It has already done so. So again, I know you've mentioned this many times. So many people people have mentioned this. Get out of Florida. If you can, get out. You have very little time left, but there is still some time left.
All right, Allison, I want you to stand by.
Over the last few hours, the center has been moving more towards the west and is very close to the north coast of Cuba. And we expect a turn then to the northwest and then the north over the next 24 to 36 hours, increasing the risk to the Florida Keys. We're very concerned about that area, as well as the southwest coast of Florida. And indeed, we have a storm surge warning up for the coast all along the southeastern peninsula and the Florida Keys. Very dangerous in the Florida Keys. The water levels will be rising along the coast of the peninsula as well.
Ed, we have been speaking to people who are saying that they're going to ride it out in the Keys, and if you can just speak to those people now, what do you say to them?
I'm not sure that they'll make it. And we're talking about a 5 to 10 foot storm surge on keys and islands that are only 5 to 10 feet high. And if it was just that, that's a risk as it is. But we have waves on top of that, perhaps 15-foot waves, even higher, along with hurricane force winds. It's very risky to be out there at this point, and I would advise everyone who's left to get out now while they can.
Yeah. So give us a kind of damage. What kind of damage are you expecting now that you're saying this is moving further west? What give us a damage here?
You know, the greatest risk now is going to be still for the Florida Keys, as we mentioned, and the southwestern coast of Florida, and then all the way up towards the Tampa area. We're not going to rule out some damage as far east as the Florida East Coast. The hurricane is quite large, so even if the center of the hurricane comes ashore on the west coast, the storm is large enough that on the east coast we'll still have hurricane force winds potentially and tropical storm force winds for more than a day along the east coast.
Yeah. So listen, if you can't leave the state of Florida, many people cannot leave the state of Florida. They either waited too long or they don't have the resources. Where is the best place to be in Florida right now? Is it possible for you to give that advice?
Well, the best place to be is away from the water. If there are 5 words to remember, it's get away from the water. And that means both for the storm surge along the coast and ultimately for rainfall, which will be causing flooding. We're expecting as much as 8 to 15 inches of rain, possibly 20 in some places. So stay away from the water, whether it's the coast or the canals and rivers inland, and then be in a well-fortified structure to ride out the wind.
So what is the most important thing people in Irma's path need to know right now, Ed?
The most important thing is that storm surge will be building along the Florida Keys and along the southwest coast and potentially the southeast coast. That's where we lose lives mostly in hurricanes, and that's where we're most concerned for this particular hurricane, where, as we've said, the waters will rise to potentially 10 feet, maybe even 12 feet or higher, depending on the final intensity at landfall.
My goodness. Ed, I have to ask you, even the National Hurricane Center, where you are right now, is in the path of this storm. You ever gotten hit?
Oh, yes. 25 years ago, we went through Category 5 Hurricane Andrew. Some of us were here then. We've experienced Wilma and Katrina since then. We will be sheltering in place beginning tomorrow afternoon, closing up. We've got the shutters up here. We have our supplies, and we'll be riding it out like the rest of our community here in Southeast Florida.
Ed Rappaport, please stay safe, you guys. We need you, and we appreciate your time during this very hectic and
Even though it has interacted with some of these small islands, also north central sections of Cuba, they have been walloped as the eye has been brushing along the coast there. It is still a remarkably strong hurricane. We saw it dip a little bit yesterday to a Category 4, but we try not to emphasize just that the winds may fluctuate 5 or 10 miles per hour because this is a monster storm. We've been saying that over and over again. And for the folks who evacuated from South Florida, good for you. I highly am impressed that you would take the initiative to do that, because this, as it makes its way across the Florida Keys and into those southern counties of Florida, there is going to be, by this time tomorrow, we are looking at the eye of this hurricane just offshore. We're already beginning to see a couple of those bands move in and sweep across the Bahamas, also along some of those coastal counties of Florida. So what happens? All right, we go into Saturday evening as a Category 4, and then just before sunrise, or right about that time, sometime between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., it should be making landfall somewhere between the Florida Keys, Key West, and Key Largo. Somewhere in that vicinity. I know that sounds like a broad area, but it moves there, it appears that it will move more so on the western side of the Florida Peninsula. You may remember a few days ago, computer models were edging it a little further to the east. But don't focus on exactly where that eye is going to be, because the impact is going to be so severe, because the hurricane force winds extend out 120 miles from the center. At the widest point across the Florida Peninsula, it's about 130 miles. So the entire peninsula could be consumed by hurricane force Category 4 winds. And that's going to be phenomenal. We'll have another update at the bottom of the hour.
I have to ask you quickly here, because I think it's important, obviously. So when do you think, so the Florida Keys are going to start getting hit? About what time?
I think tomorrow they're already going to feel some of those outer bands. The wind will start to pick up. You'll see some tropical storm force winds, I think, for most of the day in the Florida Keys. It's going to be very windy. You're going to see a rip current, and you might see a few isolated bands of storms move through. But by late tomorrow afternoon, it's going to be some of these southern counties that we have talked about where you start to see that wind pick up. A couple of bands are expected to move through. Don't be surprised if some of those winds are on the order of 40 to 50 miles per hour. It is going to be fairly steady with the rain coming down. Here we go. This is the wind forecast. Where you see that white.
About what time is that, Karen? Where you had it right there, right just before. About what time is that? Is that on Sunday?
So for right around Miami over towards Naples, if you're talking about those particular cities,
yes, ma'am.
I think you'll start to see that reasonably between about 5 and maybe 8 o'clock in the evening. You'll see that slowly rise, but then it will dramatically pick up. And by tomorrow evening, when I am talking to you tomorrow evening, we're looking at a hurricane just about ready to make landfall within about 5 or 6 hours. It has slowed down just a little bit. So as it gets closer to land, we might see those, I say the word perturbations, but these little iterations of the storm, maybe slowing down, maybe wiggling a little bit, maybe the eye changing form, maybe the wind speed changing. There are all kinds of things that can happen when it starts to interact with land. But the water temperatures here, what drives everybody to these beautiful Florida beaches, the water temperatures here have been at near record-setting levels. They're in the upper 80s. It's like a bathtub. That's what hurricanes love. They love lovely bath water temperature and nothing in the atmosphere to shear it off, move it in another direction. This is the perfect ingredients that have come together for Irene to just wreak havoc.
Irma.
From one end, Irma, from one end of Florida all the way to the other.
Okay, Karen, let me ask you. So see where it is right there, where you have it right now. I know it's not exact, but about what time is that when that eye is right there? And what are we looking at Sunday for that? Where is that?
This says Sunday p.m., but you have to remember, once this makes landfall, it may slow down. But this could be hours that we expect these winds between the 75 and 100 plus mile per hour winds just rake across Key Largo, Miami, West Palm, Naples, Marco Island, Fort Myers, and then a little bit later around Tampa, St. Pete, over towards Fort Pierce. But this is going to be a steady progression going from Saturday evening, I think, early or mid-evening, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. And then this is the forecast model for Sunday, 8 p.m. But this is the core. Right. We try not to get singularly focused on that because it can have little wobbles. It can jog a little bit. And I think that's exactly what this is going to do because it is interfering with land. And that clearly demonstrates, here we are at Monday, 2 a.m. All right, this may not be a good depiction. The further out we go, the little wonkier the computer models become. But you can see the entire state of Florida is engulfed by either tropical storm force winds. Then there's going to be the storm surge. I didn't even mention that, but along some of these southeastern coasts for Irma, there could be a storm surge of 5 to 10 feet possible. What does that mean? If you took water and pushed it rapidly towards a wall, you would see just how it would inundate and just the force of that. That's what we're looking at. Sometimes storm surge gets a little confusing, but all of this is low-lying territory. a lot of places are built with concrete buildings, and you think, my building is going to withstand that.
We were just
I'm
talking
in a
about
high
that.
Rise.
Right.
Yes, I'm in a high rise. It can't affect me. I'll be above the flooding. But actually, the wind, the higher you go, the wind actually increases by 20% or 30% more. So a lot of people who think they're high up and they're escaping a lot of things, they're actually still in a lot of danger because there's less friction the higher you go. When you're down around the ground, a lot more friction. So the higher you go, the higher those winds are expected. There's just a lot of dynamics.
Can I ask you another
here.
question?
Sure.
So you mentioned the storm surge, right? But then on top of that, right, Karen, don't you have waves too? Wave height on top of that 20 to 25 possibly feet waves?
Yes, we do. It's for the tides down here. We haven't really been talking about the time of high tide and when there's landfall because the difference between high and low tide here is not huge. It's not like if you went to Canada where it could be 10 or 12 feet. It's enormous. Here it's very little. But you do get these waves because there's jostling. And then you get that forward speed, that storm surge that pushes that water on shore. But not just on this coast. We're also looking on the coast from Naples all the way down towards Key Largo and Key West. We could see a storm surge there of 8 to 12 feet because it's a little shallower here. We've also done, I'll ask my own question. People have wondered, well, couldn't it just go across the Keys and into the Gulf of Mexico? It could. But the computer models, which are very sophisticated, have indicated that it is going to make that turn towards the north, that right-hand turn, and go up like this. But you saw that it has had variations. Initially, it was a little further to the east, and then it moved right over the central portion. But now the edging of it is more so along this western edge.
Everyone asks, why does it do that curve? Like, because it seems, it's going, further west, and then all of a sudden it curves up. What causes it to do that, Karen?
Well, we've got a lot of things in the atmosphere. There is a trough further to the north, other than what I'm depicting. There's also a ridge of high pressure further to the north. So it wants to escape those things. It wants to take the path of least resistance. It's almost like if you rolled a bowling ball down an alley, it gets so much momentum, so it wants to take the path of least resistance. This is the path of least resistance. It doesn't want to bump into a frontal system. It wants to ride underneath a ridge of high pressure. So it's more favorable for it to move in that vicinity.
You're so good at this. I learned so much right there. And I had so many questions during the entire time we've been broadcasting and watching, and you just answered all of them. Karen McGinnis, you're the best. Thank you. We'll get back to you.
I think you just had one of the correspondents out in the field say, we just got hit by one of the outer bands. Did he get hit by one of the outer bands? Yes, he most certainly did. Even though Irma is still roughly 300 miles east-southeast of Miami. We're still picking up that deep tropical moisture. And I do mean deep tropical moisture, so much so it is even flowing in across the southeastern quadrant of Florida. Right around Miami, there's going to be some pretty vivid lightning here for the next hour or so. All right, what is Irma doing? It is a Category 5 hurricane. It was bumped down overnight throughout part of the day, still Category 4, now it's a 5. We shouldn't really focus on those particular categories. How it's going to impact you is going to be very significant. Wind gusts up to 195, moving west at just about 13 miles an hour. As I said, it's about 300 miles to the east-southeast. Right now, the eye of this is just about moving over the north-central coast of Cuba. So what can we expect going into the next 24 to 48 hours as far as precipitation goes? Now, because the track has now moved over more towards western Florida, this is what we're looking at. Take a look at some of these rainfall totals that we have for you and look to see where some of the highest rainfall totals are, mostly towards the western edge of Florida. And you go in towards Naples, also Fort Myers, you could see well over a foot of rainfall. And into the Florida Keys are flat. and there's no place for that water to go. We might expect 15 inches of rainfall in some areas. Now, still significant rainfall in places around Miami, also into Fort Pierce, might see 5 or 6 inches of rainfall there. As we move steadily towards the north, Orlando, 7.5 inches of rain. And now look at this shift again. Now there's a shift where it looks like Jacksonville could see about 11 inches of rainfall. Why are we seeing that? Because sometimes these systems tend to enhance the moisture out ahead of them. We see this in the tropics across the Pacific a lot, where a storm system or a cyclone moves over the Philippines, but it enhances the moisture more towards the south. It's going to be essentially the same situation here, where you see that purple shaded area right around the beautiful parks there in northern sections of Florida. 10, 11 inches of rainfall. That is going to be devastating. All right, we go back towards the board, give you a little bit more information as to what we can expect. Who is going to see the eye move over them? Well, it does look like the computer models have said more so if we were, I did this yesterday, if we drew a line right down the center of Florida, those computer models were trending more so to the west as opposed towards the east. It's a minor shift, because the entire state is going to be engulfed. All right, here's a computer model. Here's the European model. We bring it up towards Key West, the center right there, and we put it into motion. There we go, moving across the Everglades, headed towards Captiva, and even the American model. A little less refined, a little less data, but still nonetheless now is in agreement with what the European model is saying. But you can see just how broad this is. And starting tomorrow, I mentioned this to Don just a few minutes ago, all of South Florida, all of South Central Florida, at least tropical storm force winds by tomorrow afternoon. Into the overnights, you're going to see more before it makes landfall somewhere in through probably the north central Florida Keys, then towards the Everglades. So storm surge here, 8 to 12 feet, 8 to 12 feet. It's not like this is, high terrain. This is low terrain. With the rainfall, there's going to be significant flooding, not just at the coast, but inland. And you could see hurricane force winds because they extend out 120 miles. At its furthest across Florida, it's about 130 miles. So the entire state is going to be afflicted with what happens with Irma over the next 24, 48, and 72 hours. Please be careful. This is really a dire situation across the entire state. Don, over 5.5 million people are under mandatory evacuation.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about that shift. You said it's a minor shift, but a shift nonetheless, and it changes things slightly, I would imagine. So it's going further towards the west. Does it make a difference? Because I think the waters in the Gulf are warmer than the waters in the Atlantic. How big a difference does that make?
They may be within a few degrees, but, the water is shallow and clear, and they're saying that they have been at near record-setting levels, right around 86 to around 88 degrees. Right around the Florida Keys, those waters are very warm, and then over towards the Gulf, we've got water temperatures just about the same. It's like bath water, essentially. Essentially, the shift means that a portion, that upper right quadrant, is where we typically see the tornado activity. And so that means along this eastern edge of Florida, this is where you're going to have to watch out for that tornadic activity in the next couple of days when those bands come on shore. And you can see the wind is really going to be pounding across this eastern edge. And for this western edge, we've got significant storm surges. I just mentioned 8 to 12 feet is possible. What are the comparisons that we've seen? Well, we saw Andrew. That was around Miami. We saw Charlie. That actually made 2 landfalls in Florida. There are a lot of comparisons to other hurricanes, Don. But this one breaks all the rules. This one is completely different because it's so large. It's Category 5. It's just a whole game changer completely.
Unbelievable. Florida. I mean, no matter what the scenario it is, it's devastating. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate
Isa, as we take a look at the radar, we're already seeing some of the bands, the deep tropical moisture just at the periphery of Irma as it starts to make its way all the way from Miami down to the Florida Keys. What's interesting about this is here's one band, a little bit of a break here before the next band, which is much broader. You'll see lots of lightning. You'll see the wind pick up. You will see this over the next 24 hours. Only it gets steadily worse. You'll see band after band. Then the bands are closer together. Right now, Irma is about 300 miles to the east-southeast of Miami. What also has been very interesting is it just kind of jogs around this region. It did make landfall along this north-central coast of Cuba, and now it looks like it may start to make that turn more towards the north. And the computer models have shifted as well. But I want to complete what is the current position of Irma with 160 mile per hour winds, a category 5 hurricane, even though it has interacted with these various islands across the Bahamas and into the Caribbean. And now Cuba, once its eye wall made its way on shore there, is going to bounce back out over these very warm waters and continue on its trek towards South Florida. Now, the computer models initially, earlier in the week, were saying, well, Miami is the place that the computer models are kind of agreeing on. Then they started to shift. That European model shifted just a little bit. All right, Saturday around 3 p.m., Key Largo, Key West, Miami, towards Naples, you're looking at increasing hurricane force winds. And then we start to see that pick up more for Fort Myers and West Palm Beach. Hurricane force winds from the Atlantic coast of Florida all the way to the Gulf Coast, because at its widest, it's 130 miles wide. Just the eye of this hurricane is about 120 miles in diameter, with winds at category 5 force. Michael, back.
mahali ambapo shehena hiyo imetunzwa ili tuweze kushuhudia matangazo haya katika studio zetu zilizopo Mikocheni kwa muda wote. Na muda mchache sasa basi nirejeshe matangazo haya katika studio zetu zilizopo Mikocheni kuonesha kile tunachoenda mara baada ya muda mchache. Kwa sasa mtazamaji, mara baada ya muda mchache nitarejea tena kwa ajili ya kukupasha na kuonesha kile tunachoenda kukitazama kwa sasa. Kwenu studio Mikocheni.